All right, let's start. Welcome to the panel on civil-military relations. My name is Jonna Alava, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Russia Research Group here at the National Defence University. I had planned to give a presentation myself, but as we got so many excellent papers, we decided to give the floor to researchers who don't work on this island. That said, I will say a few words about why this panel matters and what I am currently working on. If time allows, perhaps we can extend the session by 5 minutes at the end because of me. So, why study civil-military relations? Russia's war in Ukraine has revealed that one of the military's key vulnerabilities lies in its personnel. Persistent problems are evident in chains of command and logistics, in discipline and morale, in the rotation of forces, and in the reluctance to convey unpleasant intelligence to the political leadership. The expansion and fragmentation of military and paramilitary forces also indicate deeper problems in the manpower system, raising questions about the personnel loyalty. At the same time, however, this fragmentation can also serve as a strength, as Russia can deploy these groups flexibly, for example, in sabotage operations. Moscow has proven relatively effective at adapting to challenges related to human resources and to managing the relationship between the state, the military, and society. Despite a cannon fodder style of warfare, societal support seems to remain high for the war, largely sustained through repressive means. At the same time, the armed forces aim to increase troop numbers from 1 million to 1.5 million. How can this be achieved under conditions of demographic decline and broader social strain? These questions lie at the heart of civil-military relations. To assess Russia's military development, we need a better understanding of the evolving dynamics between the state, the armed forces, and society. Civil-military relations is a broad and interdisciplinary field. Political science approaches often focus on institutional power relations and civilian control of the military, while sociological perspectives place greater emphasis on society and the lived experiences of people within these relations. So, I'm working on a paper that examines how Russia currently understands and conceptualizes its civil-military relations. Among the most influential Western frameworks, also widely cited in Russian research, is Samuel Huntington's concept of objective control, which holds that the armed forces should remain subordinate to civilian authorities and outside politics, while civilian authorities grant the military autonomy to develop its own professional norms and practices, leading to Huntington's related concept of military professionalism. Western theories also recognize the role of civil society in creating stable civil-military relations. There must be shared values and consensus among the state, the military, and society. But when we look at Russia, we see that it lacks civil society and that military professionalism, in Huntington's sense, is largely absent, as the Kremlin has steadily tightened its grips over the armed forces, most visibly through the return of political commissars within the military. These theories therefore fit poorly with Russia's actual civil-military relations. A researcher approaching the literature on Russian civil-military relations quickly encounters a conceptual and contextual cacophony and chaos. Russian scholars draw on Western theories and on their own interpretations, terms, definitions, and concepts, which are unevenly institutionalized across different organizations. Little comparative conceptual work has been undertaken, and no integrated framework links the Russian and Western research traditions. Moreover, there is no universal understanding of which forms of civil-military relations best promote military effectiveness. Interpretations are deeply culturally bound and case-specific, making theorization difficult. My research examines how Russian academics and the state legitimize and conceptualized current authoritarian churn in civil-military relations, what they identify as its pros and cons, and how they see its effects on military development. My empirical material consists of Russian language research on civil-military relations from 2014 to the present. The aim is to develop a more coherent theoretical framework. So stay tuned. Perhaps in the next seminar I will be able to share some results. But now let us turn to this panel and its presentations, which adopt a more sociological approach to civil-military relations. Unfortunately, two of the panelists will keep their presentations online due to unexpected circumstances, but I'm sure the panel will be a success anyway. The format of the panel is as follows. First, we will have a 20-minute presentation followed by a 10-minute discussion, and please use the microphone when you ask questions. Let me introduce the first panelist of this session, Olha Meloshyna. Olha is an officer of the Communications Department of the Command of the Unmanned Systems Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Her work focuses on building an effective communication system, promoting innovation, and ensuring transparency in the activities of the Unmanned Systems Forces, and taking also part in preparing analytical and media materials that highlight the role of unmanned systems in modern warfare. Olha's topic today is From Society to the Battlefield, the hybrid militarization of civil life in Russia during the war against Ukraine. The floor is yours, Olha.
Good morning, colleagues. My name is Olga Miloshyna. I am an officer in the Armed Forces of Ukraine and currently serve as a communication officer in the Unmanned System Forces. Today I would like to share my research on how war in Russia moves beyond the battlefield and becomes embedded in civilian life. My presentation is titled From Society to the Battlefield, the hybrid militarization of civil life in Russia during the war against Ukraine. The main question that motivated this study is what drives ordinary Russians to continue sincerely believing in justification of the action of the armed forces of Russia Federation, to support their army, and to look past the crimes committed by Russia. When we talk about contemporary war, we often focus on what happens on the battlefield, military operations, weapon system, or tactical outcomes. However, modern war increasingly extends far beyond the front line and deeply reshapes civilian life. In the case of Russia, militarization doesn't operate only through the armed forces or direct military mobilization. It functions as a broader social process embedded in state-controlled media, cultural production, religion narratives, and memory politics. Through these channels, war becomes normalized, routinized, and presented as a legitimate and even necessary part of everyday life. Much of exciting analysis understandably concentrates on propaganda, disinformation, or military strategy. While these approaches are important, they often underestimate the societal dimension of war, how attitudes, identities, and norms within society are gradually reshaped to sustain long-term support for violence and aggression. Before turning to specific cases, I would like to briefly clarify how I use the concept of hybrid militarization in this research. I understand hybrid militarization as a systemic process in which military logics, values, and practices extend beyond the immediate process in which military logic values battlefield and becomes embedded in civilian, social, cultural, and symbolic domains, including media, etc. Rather than framing war an exceptional transitional or temporary condition, hybrid militarization normalizes violence and integrates war into everyday life. In doing so, it enables long-term societal support for military action. On this slide, I identify the main social-cultural actors involved in hybrid militarization. These are not military institutions, but civilian and semi-civilian spheres that shape how war is interpreted, justified, and made socially acceptable. In the following slides, I will briefly look at how each of these actors contributes to this process. During my presentation, to provide better understanding and context, I focus on real examples in Russia that Russia has continued to implement since the beginning of its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The Russian state uses religion as a tool to influence people and support the militarization of society. This is not about religion language, but about close cooperation between the state, the military, and the Russian Orthodox Church to justify war and violence for a large part of the population. For example, in early March 2022, while Russian forces were occupying Bucha and Hostomel, Patriarch Kirill said in the sermon that Russia was fighting a metaphysical battle against evil in Ukraine. He described the war not just as a political, but as moral and spiritual struggle given in a sacred meaning. The photo shown take after the liberation of Bucha shows what was really happening at that time. The woman in this image was Irina Filkina. She was killed by Russian forces on March 5, 2022, during the occupation of the city. Her body was later found on the roadside together with another victims. So Patriarch Kirill said in the sermon that Russia was fighting a metaphysical battle against evil in Ukraine. This strategy is also reflected in everyday practices. Russian authorities and religious institutions regularly invite military personnel to so-called religious and community events, including those involving children. For example, the photo shows children's activities held at the St. Elijah Church, together with Russian military personnel in the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Such events normalize the presence of the military, link it to religion, and help instill loyalty to the army from an early age. Another important group shaping public attitudes is pro-government civic movements and opinion leaders. They are constantly present in the public space and play a key role in promoting pro-war narratives. These include pro-Russian bloggers, artists, singers, and actors who publicly support the war and present it as a normal and acceptable social and cultural phenomenon for Russian society. For example, a concert was held on Red Square following Russia's declared accession of the occupied Ukrainian territories of Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia region. Cultural industries, such as film, television series, and music, represent the next deliberate step in normalizing war as an acceptable social reality. Through popular culture, war is presented not as a violence or aggression, but as heroic, necessary, and moral justifying action. One example is four-part television series produced by the Russian state broadcaster Channel 1. The series seeks to justify Russian actions in Ukraine under the pretext of protecting civilians and was released on the second anniversary of the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. The storyline focused on the Battle of Mariupol, portraying Russian military action in positive and legitimating light. One of the key elements of Russian militarization of society is the systemic indoctrination of children, both in Russia itself and in the temporary occupied territories of Ukraine. This begins with the forces introduction of the Russian school curriculum, which includes the anti-Ukrainian narratives and state propaganda. Militaristic themes are integrated into regular school subjects, making war and military service appear normal, honorable, and inventable. Children are actively involved in pro-government youth military organizations such as Yunarmia and pre-conscription training programs like the Avantgarde system. These programs familiarize children with military discipline, weapons, and the idea of the future service in the armed forces. Beyond the classroom, children participate in one-theme events, weapons handing lessons, and visits to military units. Over time, this creates a system of psychological conditioning that promotes loyalty to the Russian state and military while discouraging independent or critical thinking. Beyond education and indoctrination, another key mechanism of Russia's societal militarization operates through the state-controlled media. Unlike classical wartime propaganda, Russia didn't fully shift to emergency or total war coverage. Instead, the war was carefully integrated into familiar and routine news formats. Reports from the battlefield and presented alongside sport news, cultural events, and discussion of social policy. This framing deliberately avoids treating the war as a national catastrophe, rather than addressing the causes of the war or its moral implication. Media coverage focuses on managing its consequences and maintain a sense of stability. As a result, the war is portrayed as a collective achievement rather than a tragedy. Public attention is direct toward pride in the army, national resilience, and state achievements. Over time, the war becomes just one topic among many in everyday media consumption, routine, acceptable, and socially normalized, allowing public support to persist far beyond formal military or corrective structures. Taken together, these examples show that the war in Russia is situated not only by military force, but by social adaptation and managed consent. The Russian state normalizes war through the everyday institution, gradually transforming it from an exceptional event into accepted social condition. Rather than relying on constant correction or mass mobilization, this hybrid form of militarization operates from routine, familiarity, and cultural continuity. War narratives are embedded in news, education, culture, and historical memory, allowing daily life to continue alongside violence. This approach is effective because it reduces resistance and discourages critical reflection. At that time, it creates a long-term security risk. Even after active hostilities end, such practices make demilitarization, accountability, and post-war social transformation significantly more difficult. Understanding hybrid militarization is essential for assessing the resilience of Russians' war effort, anticipating war's social and political dynamic within Russia's society, and designing effective security, information, and accountability policies that go beyond purely military responses. Thank you for your attention. Glory to Ukraine.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Olha. It's devastating material, but now we have 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you for your presentation. You described the plethora of measures that Russia is undertaking to militarize society and reaching out to the young population. So, how to measure how effective this is? Because one thing is being exposed to measures, but the other thing is how far they are really internalized, and how to measure that. Do we have any methods to do so? Because I try to look into military patriotic education too, and it's always a mess to look and get really insight how far people just are exposed and just do what is required, or whether this is really changing the mindset. Do you have an idea how to study that?
I would ask my colleagues from Ukraine to translate, because some words I don't understand, please. Population? I think that in Ukraine we have 11 years of war, and I think it's influence on Russian if they don't influence on them. War in Ukraine, it's one of my position that it can be, but I think that it's part of politics, really. It's some actors, but the main actor is the state from where its actors go. So I think it's measured by the continuing the war.
Okay, thank you. In this point, I can very shortly promote my dissertation. It's about military patriotic education, and I analyze the reception also. Yes.
Thank you very much. It was really great. Thank you. I have a question, because Russians are well known of their long-term planning process. It doesn't work very well in practice, but they're trying all the time. So, in your opinion, why they invest so many efforts to, in fact, rise their society in this militarization spirit? Because they really know that after some time this war will be frozen or maybe even end, but anyway the changes in society will be continue. So I mean that if they invest so many efforts in that, they're really thinking, in your opinion, in long-term distance, or it's just for purpose of this or maybe next war and that's it? Well, so what I mean is, they are doing that because they are thinking to transform their country in next generation, or they are doing that just for this and next, or maybe next war? What's your opinion? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I think that Russia does it for future, for long term. They try to transform identity of people, especially on temporary occupied territories of Ukraine. He made it from 2022, when they occupied some territories such as Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson region. They changed curriculum of school and don't allow to use Ukrainian language, Ukrainian literature, and it's a part of their politics and long-term politics, not short time, and it's their instrument. They try to change identity, I think, of people in temporary occupied territories.
Just one question. So what's the long-term goal? Okay, it's one thing, it's to convince young generation they are more Russian than, for example, Ukrainians or other nations, but long-term focus only on Ukraine, or long-term focus on transforming the whole state for next generations?
Their state always in this system, and it doesn't want to change in the future, I think.
So it's not very long term?
It's their life of Russia in these cases.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Excellent presentation. Very compelling evidence. Thank you. But you've presented a very stark picture of a militarized society and a repressed society. I am curious, though, therefore, why, with this being the case, that as reported in Ukrainska Pravda, 24 November 2024, 150,000 people who were displaced by Russia's illegal invasion have returned to the occupied territories since managing to go to safety in Ukrainian government territory back to those occupied territories?
Sorry, but I can't speak about people who return to this territory. It's their choice, so I can judge them and tell anything about it.
Thank you for your presentation, Emil Mitikko from Finnish National Defence University. My question is maybe a bit similar to what has been asked before, but if we would play a scenario that, like, I don't know, Putin dies in very near future for some reason, and there is a power struggle within the Russian elite, and there would be a new leadership. So in your view, do you think that the new leadership would continue this militarization or this military education in schools and so on, or how much does it depend on the leadership that Russia has? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, but if we talk about Putin, I don't think that it's a situation in one person. It's a collective way of their action. And so I think this will be continuing because it's not about one person in this country, unfortunately.
Thank you so much for an interesting presentation. I'm Sinikka Parvian from the Bank of Finland. So I have to bring money into the picture. So as we know, Russia has been paying huge sign-up bonuses, huge compensation for families for dead soldiers, and there exists a theory, at least in the circle that I kind of do my research on, that and Russia has already had to cut these sign-up bonuses. So it's mainly the enlisting and conscription of Russian soldiers. It's not really ideology-based, but it's more about money. So what is your... all this kind of propaganda is probably related to kind of getting people to kind of sacrifice their life like in a cheaper way, or what do you think? What's your idea on this kind of like people being paid huge bonuses and maybe there will be cuts, and what will be the repercussions? Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question. Really, money, when we talk about soldiers, is play a central role for the army, but I think it's not so important when we talk about children, because children is a new type of people which you can form if you want. You can form soldiers from children, and you don't need to pay him for it. You can just teach him and said that Ukrainian is bad, that Ukrainian is as called is nationalism. It's cheaper than pay in the future soldiers. So it's the way of living. But what about soldiers? It's not my topic of research.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation. My question just follows, I think, from the several that we've had, and I think there's more expertise here in the room about this, and it is on this question of to what extent the state can really shape the minds of its individuals and that they actually absorb it, they internalize it. I'm thinking of the Soviet period and Marxism-Leninism and the ideological efforts to try and shape minds and thinking. We know that there was a lot of cynicism, a lot of effective rejection of ideology as having any meaning for people's lives. Formerly, there was you had to go through these formal ceremonies. From school upwards, you had to use a kind of ritual language as a part of, it's a kind of coding to be able to manage in that. But people's beliefs were rather different. So I wonder, in this situation, is it perhaps the difference that the Russian state is trying to find other ways into the minds through this association with the Russian Orthodox Church, to make it a more sort of cultural and religious association that wasn't there in the same way in the Soviet period. Other ways of doing it, because otherwise, if the state tries to push too heavily messages, it can have the reverse effect. People just start reacting against that, and they want to get on with their own lives. I would suspect that militarization, the normalization of military matters, is easier to reach. But even then, that was happening in the Soviet period, through to, if you went into school, you knew how to put together and take as Kalashnikov and so on, everyone did. But what it meant was less clear. So I think it's just perhaps a note to perhaps the situation isn't as... It may not have as much effect as one might think on the surface. And these are open questions. I wonder whether you have any comment on that.
Це зрозуміло.
Як ти думаєш, як полегше використання церкви, чи вони хочуть внести це, зробити більш культурно і ідеологічно? Тобто, як це дійсно впливало на свідомість в цьому контексті?
Yes, thank you for your question. As you said, that religious was an instrument in Soviet Union, but I think it will be continue in the future using different. It's one example when I show that children are with the military, with church, but it's not just one event. It's camp where children are with military and with church. It's not just one event in just camp where they studying during 2 weeks or more. So it's very popular especially in temporary occupied territories of Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So I think that it will be continued in different forms and more closer to modern institution using their gadgets or something else to be closer to people. So, thank you.
Any more questions? Actually, we have a little technical, or not technical, but our next panelist is not online at the moment, so we can keep on discuss on this topic or keep a short break in this point. But actually, I have one question. Do you have in Ukraine any kind of programs to fight with this militarization in occupied areas? And how do you fight?
We have exists some resistance group on the temporary occupied territories by forming own citizens of these territories gathering and try to help Ukrainian being in occupied territories. So in these territories are community of people who want to come back to Ukraine. But it's different organization, and his name is Yellow Stripe. You can see his different social media and read about it. Its organization. It's about resistance on the temporary occupied territories. But straight connect we don't have between them.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So let's have what can I say?
Questions?
Let's try 15-minute break at the moment. Let's discuss on this topic. Everyone. No, nobody's not online. So I don't know what is happening with this panel.
So today we'll
continue. Sorry about this mess. And yeah, I ask our next panelists, Kimberly and Francisco, if you can shorten your presentation a little bit, and then we have one or two questions, so we can be in time. But our second speaker is Kimberly Metcalf from King's College London, where she is a PhD candidate in war studies, focusing on Russian identity building practices in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For the past 2 years, Kimberly has served as an analytical support officer for a strategic communications project in Ukraine. Earlier in her career, she served for over a decade in the US Army with deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, Turkey, Qatar, Jordan, and Syria. What a fascinating background. Kimberly's title today is Leavers and Remainers, analyzing the relationship between the social logic and cognitive responses during military mobilization. Kimberly, please.
Thank you so much. And I'll look for the slides.
Hey, slides.
Great. Thank you. So thank you for the introduction. And as said, my name is Kimberly Metcalf, and today I'll be presenting on Leavers and Remainers, perceptions of threat perceptions, Russian threat perceptions during Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And I was actually logged in this whole time and listening, so I think it's great because my presentation was a little long anyways, so now I have the motivation to cut it down and also kind of speak to the presentations that we've already gotten to witness. So thank you so much for those, by the way, and thank you so much to the Russia Research Group for organizing this, and especially for Pinti and Sana for coordinating and organizing us all and inviting us here. So I'm very grateful to present my research, and I do want to just give a little bit of warning that I've been kind of a research hole for the past 9 months since I left the work in Ukraine. I've just been focusing on finishing up my dissertation. And so, I'll be speaking to a lot of the data that I found in my dissertation and really look forward to your feedback and sharing that with you. So next slide, please. So this is just a little bit about my background and, how this research came about, is that I started my PhD essentially at the same time at King's College London that Russia invaded Ukraine through the full-scale invasion. And I decided that I would adapt my research quickly, but at the same time, I also wanted to get to Ukraine. So I conducted my upgrade, looking at Russian official discourse and starting to do interviews, got my ethics approval, my upgrade, and began doing interviews. And then I just stopped my interviews after 31 and went to move to Ukraine to serve in the analytical support office. So if there's anything missing, I apologize, but everything is still a bit of a work in progress. Next. Next slide, please. And just to talk about my data collection, because that will likely be a question, is that I did face-to-face interviews with Russian citizens who had left the Russian Federation and went to Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, as well as Israel, Georgia, Montenegro. And I also did remote interviews with people in Serbia, for example. And also I did remote interviews with people inside the Russian Federation. And again, I got ethical approval for all of this. I need to say that. It was an arduous process and very sensitive, as one can imagine. And just to also kind of brief on the methodology, I did in-depth and semi-structured interviews. So, not keeping people like rigidly in any kind of like universal answer format. So it takes a lot of analysis and also a lot of, flexibility to, when I ask, for example, what somebody's political position is, then sometimes it's just anti-war, sometimes it's anti-current situation, sometimes it's opposition to the regime, liberal, slightly left of center, so that the answers really range. And the themes of the interviews that I conducted relate to my actual dissertation, which is a discourse analysis on Russian securitization towards Ukraine. And that focuses longitudinally. So starting actually with the Orange Revolution and then moving forward into the Revolution of Dignity and the annexation of Crimea and the military interventions in the Donbass and forward into the start of the full-scale invasion, as well as partial mobilization. So really what I'll be sharing today is the data that mostly relates to partial mobilization. Next. And looking at remainers, looking at leavers and remainers, my data collection revealed that partial mobilization is a really striking moment, which will not be surprising to anyone in this room, I'm sure. And that interviewees were incredibly forthcoming with their kind of emotional and physical responses to the full-scale invasion and partial mobilization. And given the scope of my dissertation, this seminar, I think, presented a unique opportunity to just kind of focus on one section, which is the response to the partial mobilization. And I have a lot of data also kind of relating to the social logic of my interviewees. So this is also an opportunity to kind of look at the intersection of emotional responses, behavior, and cross-analyze that with personal attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions on other topics, thematic topics like how do people perceive World War II? How do people perceive the military? So yeah, and so I deeply wanted to interrogate this topic. Building off of Olha's excellent presentation, I think there is just so much effort of the Russian state to shape the perceptions, the attitudes, and the beliefs of the population. And I think it's really important to understand how that works. And of course, it's nuanced and it's different, across different individuals. We know Russia's not a monolith. Everyone says that. But I wanted to kind of investigate this personally. So this is how the research came about. And I think what's really fascinating in that is that sometimes these conspiracy theories, this propaganda, sometimes it just comes out in really unexpected ways. And I mean, that would happen in any society likely, but especially in Russia, given how high the stakes are, I think this is incredibly important to understand. Next slide. And something that I found could be a useful tool to kind of get more into the cognitive decision-making space of society was understanding how people recognize patterns. And that is connected to my kind of investigation of the social logic of, are people religious? What kind of religion do they say that they are? Is it Orthodox? Is it astrology? Is it non-denominational Christianity? Is it something different? And you'll see some of those answers as I present them going forward. And then also looking at habits like superstition. So basically, what are the potential beliefs where agency is somewhat kind of turned over or potentially shared with something outside of the self? And looking at patternicity, it's an interesting theory to consider because it's about how we perceive threats. And if people can see threats or see patterns where there are none, or maybe see them earlier or later. And this all relates to prediction error. And so we can go to the next slide. And so when we look at prediction errors, there's two types of prediction errors. There's the type 1 error, which is false positive, believing something is real when it's not, finding a non-existent pattern, or type 2 error, a false negative, which is not believing something is real when it is not, and not recognizing a real pattern. So it's connected to like evolutionary genetics and understanding like how we evolved to recognize threats and how those kind of agency giving practices formed. Next. And this is just a quick reference to other research that's been done in this area, but I included this gas mask, not just because I'm a former chemical officer at one point in a galaxy far, far away, but because to understand how the threat perceptions work, and if it's right or wrong, it can be a little convoluted, and I've taken some time to work it out in the Russian context. But basically, you can respond to a threat, and maybe it never materializes to actually objectively. Maybe it never materializes to threaten you or to kill you, but your probability of surviving is higher by responding to a potential threat than not. And so that's something that if you are in an environment where you might need to use a gas mask, the only way of knowing that you can actually save yourself is by putting on the gas mask and responding to the threat. Because if you don't put on the gas mask, and there was an objective threat, you don't get to find out if you survived or not. So going forward, next slide, please. So there's limitations to my research, of course. It's time-stamped because it's a data collection that happened from a certain period, which was May 2023 through December 2023, and there's many questions like this indeterminate application, because the Russian context was in a liberal democracy, which shifted to an authoritarianism and then to totalitarianism. There's government repressions ongoing, but they can be quite selective, like even this consideration of selective migration, So, and of course, Russia's brutal invasion and just absolutely murderous acts in Ukraine are still ongoing. And there's also counterfactuals, which connects to the prediction error, which is that maybe some people left, and if they would have stayed in Russia, maybe nothing would have happened to them. Maybe people have not responded to the threat and stayed in Russia, and maybe nothing will happen to them. So it's very difficult to be excruciatingly determinate about this. Next slide. And what led me to this was I really wanted to take my research to the next level. So I was doing discourse analysis. I was comparing my interviewee responses to the official discourse, looking at the hidden transcript and the public transcript, and I thought, how can I use this? How can we, getting into the futures part of this presentation a little early, how can we use this? What are the incentives, motivations, opportunities that drive people to immigrate? And what role does the threat to life play? And again, I say that with a lot of sensitivity, that the objective threat to life in Russia is very different than the threat to life in Ukraine, but I'm keeping this within the Russian context. And I also wanted to look at what do the fear of movement restrictions play, because this is something that really came up in my interviewees' answers. Like, I wanted to talk about all of these things and, well, not talk about, but interview my research participants about all of these securitizing events that had happened between Russia and Ukraine. But actually, I found out that there were some events that they're really not knowledgeable about, but there was something, understandably, that everybody wanted to talk about, which was their personal experience and their perceptions during partial mobilization. So that's why I have such kind of a bulge of data in this space. And I also wanted to look at how do people rationalize, kind of coming back to one of Ola's questions, how do people rationalize supporting this, or what motivates them to support it, go along with it? Because if you're staying and you're working and you're paying taxes, at a certain point you are complicit in this, because you're not leaving, you're not disrupting. Sure, we can have a bigger debate about resistance and what that looks like, and that's not really the topic of this presentation, but I think these are important questions. So next. And so ultimately, this led me to, again, this consideration of social logic and of beliefs, and understanding that what Schirmer calls like the paranormal mind. So basically, people with elevated dopamine, which is potentially connected to having more paranormal beliefs, magical thinking, they might respond to a threat sooner or more likely to respond to a threat than somebody who doesn't have this presence of a paranormal mind or has less of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Next slide, please. And so ultimately you can see my research puzzle, which is, with the understanding that I can't measure the dopamine of the research participants and I have no access to a lab, do the expressed beliefs, attitudes, and associated rituals toward magical thinking, can I identify causal congruencies or social logic between people's magical thinking and their threat perceptions? And then essentially looking at magical thinking, is there a relationship between magical thinking and people's decision to leave Russia? Next slide, please. And so I broke it down, my interviewees, again, only 31, and I broke them down into different groups of leavers and remainers. So group 1, leaving for self, group 2, leaving for others, group 3, fear of movement restrictions, group 4, early leavers, and group 5, initial remainers. And then kind of getting towards the initial conclusions, looking at group 6, which we might be most interested in, which are the long-term remainers. Next slide, please. So the group leaving for self is probably the most clear-cut, as one would imagine. 5 out of 31 interviews who left for self were males who perceived a direct threat to their life due to partial mobilization. I will try to be fast here, so I'll skip over industry and say that they are not religious. For superstition, 3 out of 5 had no superstitious habits, and 2 out of 5 had some. And their political orientation, pretty much everyone I interviewed is anti-war, so we can just leave that as it is and understand that the differences happened between liberal or anti-political or not political across the interviewees. Next slide. And I just wanted to share some of the kind of key excerpts. I won't read them all. I'll try to read some of the more insightful ones. So Sergei, he's from Rostov, but he was living in Moscow when the war started. He said, I had an idea that I should take a weapon and go to war out of duty. Then I realized I'm a zombie. I realized I have no support for this war. The whole of Russia was a horror bubble. I decided to take responsibility for my wife and me and not participate. He was worried about what his family would think. He said he was worried that they would call him part of the fifth column or a traitor or a coward. But then when he told his family, they actually supported him. And he said, yeah, I realized that that they were kind of stuck to. So he also shared, a bit about other people who he says kind of were forced to mobilize. And we'll go to the next slide. Oh, sorry, I can't quite see the, oh, there we go. So looking here, also, it's, I guess the summary for the leaving for self is that all of these people viewed the partial mobilization as a direct threat to their life. Luca, for example, he claims, I don't have any way to verify this information, but he claims that he served in the Donbass in 2011, 2012, and he said he witnessed total irresponsibility, total theft, drug addicts, simply stupid people, and I hated it. So he just is just a complete refusal to rejoin the Russian military because he knows what he's seen before. And I have to also add that because 2 of these interviewees that left for self, they served in the military or they had parents who served in the military, they had really strong perceptions of the Russian military and the corruption, and they didn't want to be a part of it. So I think that also drove their decision making. And in this case, I don't see that any kind of magical thinking or elevated dopamine helped them recognize a pattern sooner or help drive their decision to leave. Next slide, please. And then leaving for others is the next category. And so these were mostly women. Again, unsurprisingly, that they were mostly women who probably went with their male companions. One was a male who left out of perceived threat to a partner's family member. And this group also was not very religious. They do have some superstitious habits. And they were a majority, actually they were across the board, of course, anti-war, but also libertarian or liberal. And I think across the board with this category, also very like opposition oriented. Next slide, please.
Couple of minutes.
And oh, how many minutes? Sorry.
Let's say 3.
3? Okay. So leaving for others. This is, you can read what he has to say here, but I think what's important is that he was somebody who said he was part of the opposition for a long time, but when Navalny was arrested, even though he didn't support Navalny, he said he quit the war in Russia. And yeah, I think his statement is pretty powerful. But we only have 3 minutes, so let me go forward so I can wrap it up. Next slide, please. Next slide. And this is something I want to highlight here. So again, most people very anti-war, anti-mobilization, but Olha talked about normalization, and I think this is really important, is that I had some, not anomalous behavior necessarily, but anomalous for my interview sample, I guess, which was Varvara, for example. She said, I don't feel scared because I'm a woman and because the government will not bring anxiety to society. I cannot predict the future. I think that nothing will happen in the next few months during elections. So I saw this quite a few times with women really taking their exceptional positions as they were exempt from mobilization. And I don't think that magical thinking played a role in this. I think it was just solidarity with their partner, threat, and the kind of accumulation of politics. Next slide. And these are people who left out of movement restrictions. I think they're quite interesting because if we go to the next slide, they were all women, and one actually left when the war started. Only one of my interviewees out of 31 left when the war started. Most left because of partial mobilization. Again, unsurprising, but yeah, is still an important finding. So people talked a lot about lacking freedom in Russia and that was their worst nightmare. So that's what came up here. Next slide. And this talks about Prigozhin a little bit. So I really appreciated the presentation yesterday on Prigozhin's mutiny, as it, of course, is just a really striking moment in all of this. But yeah, I think what Anastasia is saying here is that the situation was just kind of getting worse and worse, this accumulation of, toxic militarization of society that Olha was speaking about, and she could feel it everywhere. And even though a lot of the interviewees that I spoke to did not support the war, they still felt incredibly pressured by the people around them who they perceived to support the war. Next slide. And these people actually did have more evidence of magical thinking and potentially more threat recognition. And I found this interesting because, yeah, they were more novelty seeking as well. So we can kind of understand some of their motivations and incentives there. Next slide.
Sorry, Kimberly.
Slide. Oh, yeah. That's fine.
Okay, 30 seconds.
No, yeah, we can just cut to the end if you don't mind just going to the end of the presentation.
All right.
And yeah, I'm really happy to share this presentation. I kind of made it standalone just in case. And of course, anybody can ask me any questions. But yeah, if this slide person can kindly go to the very end. So I just want to wrap up here before the questions and say that I think that there are still many people who remain in Russia who don't support the war. And kind of going back to what I couldn't see the people in the audience, but from the last presentation, somebody talked about like the ritual language and that, during the Soviet Union, not everything was really landing, but people were participating just, so they could kind of move along in society. And, we know this concept of the vignette. And I think there are a lot of people who are focusing on, techniques like mindfulness and other things to kind of live in a separate space and still
sorry, Kimberly, we have to stop now and take questions. Okay. And this is so important, and you have gathered extraordinary data. I would like to read all these stories, but questions.
Hi, Sinikka Parviainen from the Bank of Finland. Really, really interesting study you've been conducting. I don't know, you didn't get to the part where there was this. Did you have some returners, people who left and then returned? And it would be really interesting if you could say something about those people. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a category that I called initial remainers, but actually something across all of the groups was that there were quite a few females who were kind of continuous returners, right? And it's that exceptionalism as a female feeling that they're exempt. It's also like the normalization that no, this war is only affecting certain people. It won't affect me. It won't come for me. And so I did cut my interview off. Like I didn't. It's complicated because I say that like one time I would talk to somebody in Moscow, and then the next they'd be out of the country the next day, and then they'd have a plan to go back to Russia, and so that was kind of complicated to categorize. But yeah, I also suspect that some of these individuals that I interviewed did already return, but the females, like there's one female that I cover in Initial Remainer, and she has all of her, accumulation of biopolitics and trauma and reasons why she wanted to leave Russia, but of course she's not political. And she just wants to earn money and she wants stability and all of those things. But she did end up leaving to get married, but she still goes back and forth to Russia all the time. So yeah, these are an interesting group that I can kind of discuss on a case-by-case basis, but I would say the most cohesive factor is that they're female. And then a lot of men did also tell me that they were, separated from their wives while they were waiting for, more long-term plans and their wives to join them, because their wives would lose their job if they had just left Russia with partial mobilization. And something else that came up were the men who were like absolutely obstinate of I will not return to Russia no matter what. I mean, one quote that kind of stays with me is, I will not return to Russia while this war is going on, because I will, and in general, I don't want to return to Russia ever, because I don't want to ride in a taxi with someone who has killed Ukrainians. So some pretty, I guess, intense statements like that too.
Okay, thank you, Kimberly. I'm so sorry we have to move on, but please send Kimberly questions on email, and let's be in touch. I also will do that. But,
Thank you.
Yeah, so our last presenter today is Francisco Manuel Villegas Cara. Francisco holds a PhD in languages, texts, and contexts. He's currently a researcher in the Slavic philology group at the University of Granada.
So do you listen to me now?
Yes.
Does it work? Can you listen to me now?
Yes, we can.
Pues,
Do you hear me?
a ver, ¿qué pasa ahora?
Yeah. His presentation today is titled Civil-Military Relations and Societal Mobilization in Wartime Russia, Institutional Dynamics and the Reconfiguration of Power. Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So can you listen to me well now? Yes? Do you listen to me? Yes?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello? Yes? Yes, I do. Yes? So, it's okay? Well, so yes, I do. Yes. So, okay. So then I will take it. So, yes, do you listen to me now? Okay. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, I will stick to to the time, yeah, because I know that, yeah, I'll try to do this in 10 minutes. So I'm in Spanish, so I tend to talk a lot. But let's then start. So you can go next, yeah, to the next slide, yeah. So the first thing is that today we'll present you a work in progress, yeah, on civil military relation and social mobilization in wartime Russia. But rather than offering final results, yeah, or text analysis, my aim is to share the analytical framework, the research logic, yeah, and what I'm working right now, yeah, and how the work has changed, yeah, because actually I started to work in the critical analysis of the political discourse in Russia some years ago already during my previous research. You can go to the next slide, yeah, and just about a bit of the context, yeah. Because Russia's war in Ukraine, let's say, is not just a short-term military campaign, as it was planned at the beginning, but rather a already prolonged war that has changed a lot. Yeah, these civil relations within the Russian society, even though, yeah, these relations, as someone before commented, yeah, in the public, were very tough, yeah, in the past, also during the Soviet period. But what interests me is not only how the war is fought on the battlefield, let's say, but how the power is reorganized, yet socially and symbolically through the discourses, yeah, and how it helps to this that the war keeps, yeah, and over time, because this is not so simple if we analyze other conflicts around the globe. Okay, you can go next slide, yeah. So the discursive foundation, yeah. So before moving to the war period, as I said, I would like to briefly state some my project within my previous and earlier research, because my doctoral PhD dissertation was devoted to the analysis of the presidential discourses of Vladimir Putin, and how some words, keywords like nation, sovereignty, or adjectives like veliki. So I assume that most of you speak Russian, yeah. How they were used, yeah, how they change, yeah, somehow, how people started to understand them differently, yeah. You can move to the next slide, and I'll show you very briefly, yeah, some of my first findings, yeah, when I analyzed this. Well, here you got the words nation analyzed not just in the frequency is important, but also the contextual use of this term, not nation, natia in Russian, nationalny, общенациональный, you know, because, you know, I spent in Russia my first years as a student, almost 4 or 5 years, from 2001 to 2004-5, and then every year I came back, and then for my PhD also I was living there for a couple of years. And even as a foreigner, yeah, at the beginning I rarely heard this word. It sounds weird to Russian language, yeah, Nazia. And then I decided, okay, let's go analyze this word. And then you can see here in the graphic, in this diagram, I analyzed the use of this in Putin's discourses, yeah, in the speech to the Federal Assembly, and also in his, you know, this program, Primaya Líneas Presidenta, yeah, so prime direct line with the president. Not as I said, I saw this pattern, yeah, not only in the use, so he was using more and more this kind of concept related to nation, or the term nation, nationalny, nationalist, and so, but also how the context changed. So it was like at the beginning it was a more civic institutional references, and it moves towards a moralized civilizational, yeah, understanding of the national belonging. So, and that I say to my colleagues that I think that the war actually started not in 2022, but already in 2001, let's say. So you can move to the next one. Building on this, yes. Yes, so exactly. So building to this early work, yeah, the current project asks to show, yeah, this relationship between the Russian state, the armed force, and the civil society, and how this is being redefined under the wartime. Because, as I repeat, this has changed, I think, a lot, and how this now is contributing, yeah, and legitimizing somehow what was previously already assumed. Yeah, I mean, that to me at least it was like a preparation for what is going on now on the battlefield. So you can go next. Yeah, why I decided, yeah, to analyze Putin discourse. First of all, because I think that it plays, or his discourses, a particularly strong organizing role within the Russian society, of course, and policies, and because it functions simultaneously as a strategic communication, norm setting, and symbolic mobilization, even though, of course, it's not written by Putin himself, but if all of you who has been maybe living in Russia or who are familiar to the Russian media, you know how deep impact his speeches have on the Russian society. The next, please, you will see something. This picture, was taken. Well, I took that when I was living in Russia, in Moscow, actually in 2013. And when I saw this in Moscow, in the center of Moscow, it was like, what the hell is this? And because these children standing like soldiers already. Maybe they are 6-7 years old. And that kind of propaganda, Ministerstwo Obrony Rosyjskiej Federacji, something official, that is somehow a very concrete example of how this discourse translates actually into everyday visual space, and at the same time shapes this societal realm, because nobody, I think, in Russia will be strange when looking at these pictures. I assume that for you will be a bit weird, I think, at least. So you can move to the next, the theoretical framework of my current work, So the first, I will combine 3 stands of literature. So the first one is the civil-military relations theory, then on authoritarian resilience, and on wartime mobilizations, and the third one is the most important to me, or where I'm most involved, is of course the research on strategic and narratives and the political discourse, and where language is treated as a constitutive of power, and the construction of this symbolic power, also the real power in the end of the day, and how the war has acted or acts always to as a stress test, and brings these 3 dimensions together. Next is about methodology. So of course, my main methodologically point is the critical discourse CDA of key presidential speeches between 2000, when I started my PhD, and then 2025. With a particular focus, of course, now after the events in 2022. This will complement that with some other linking discourse shifts, institutional developments, in the end, try to triangulate these different sources, independent media, and then secondary research. And even from my first notes when I was living there, I also got familiarized with many people working in different spheres, in education, academia, but also in the military. Unfortunately, some of them had to leave Russia, but what I think that I have some, let's say, an advantage that I was there when all this transitional happened, in not only in the language itself, but also in the reality, in the society, within the society. You can move to the next, to look at some key turning points, because I will focus on these 3 moments that I think that were very important to this topic. The first one, of course, is the beginning of the first mobilization in 2022, after it was clear that this war wasn't only in 3 days. The second will be the Prigozhin rebellion in June 2023. And the last one is this expansion, let's say, of these regional voluntary units that have somehow challenged this centralized organization of this SVO, this military special operation. And how this moment rebuild adaptation anytime through informality. The next, some preliminary observations I have done so far is that there is a shift, of course, from this state central language towards a more civilizational and existential framing. When Putin talks about this Russian center of culture, the Russian world, all these things, and how this civilian identity is increasingly framed as a potentially military, and is seen now as a part of the rear front Yeah, so they are part of this war, and when Putin and all the politicians, of course, in Russia talk about the war, they assume that all the Russian people is with them. Yeah. So this ambiguity between the civilian loyalty and the military duty is somehow blurred now. Next. So the working hypothesis so far is that Russia's wartime governance relies greatly on a discursive and institutional fusion, and the civilian and military spheres. They are almost the same thing right now. Even if we look at the economy also, and how this societal mobilization becomes a permanent condition rather than an exceptional one, as it was presented at the beginning of the conflict. So this all, let's say, legitimize, of course, the regime, but on the other side, it weakens, the classical models of this division between the civilian oversight, the civil and the military. Even though, as I repeat, in Russian that wasn't so clear as maybe in our Western societies. The next, just to finish very short, why this matters? I think the first, of course, for Russia, because this raises questions, about whether post-war, civil-military relation will return to a previous situation or not. For comparative politics, also it challenges our models, in Western countries, liberal understanding of civilian control, and of course in the end for security studies, because it suggests that war should be analyzed as a societal system, not just only in the battlefield. I know this is very important, of course, for militaries, but not leave this unattended, let's say. And next steps to be taken. Next slide, please. Of the project, so will be to create a systematic textual analysis that will show all these patterns I commented now, integrate into a broader comparative framework, that will let us to understand better what will happen next in Russia. Nobody knows. I know this is very difficult, but yes. We'll try to see what comes next. Thank you very much. I hope that it was clear. I tried to be very brief and some conclusion of this. And if you have any questions, So just to see that Russia, as I wrote here, cannot be understood through institution alone, but also through this discursive narratives that are taking place now in Russia and within the Russian society. And how they are now intensifying, some patterns that were already started 20 years ago, as I say. The war didn't start in 2022, but in 2001. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francisco. Can you hear us?
Oh, yes,
cool.
Yes, I do. Okay.
That's a positive surprise.
No,
yes, that was super interesting and so well structured. Interesting research.
Thanks.
So now we have questions.
Thank you so much. Many of your points resonate with me as well. So would you agree that this militarization of Russian society goes in parallel with depoliticization of Russian society? And if yes, how they can be matchable? And by depoliticization, I mean intentional promotional of keeping society aside of questioning politics and stay loyal to the current regime.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Actually, very interesting because I think that this depoliticization, it may sound a bit weird, but I studied political science also in Russia during 1 year. And it strikes me a lot that students, they already said, we are not studying politologia, but we are studying baltologia. Baltat in Russian, maybe some of you know, baltat is just like to speak about nothing, So I think that this depoliticization didn't start also now, but it's something very deep into the Russian society, even though I would say after the Soviet period, but if you go into the roots of the Russian society in history, the Russian society always was kept like apart from the political decisions, of the political, let's say, world, and this militarization of the society that is taking now place, just I think strength this depoliticization. I think this is one of the most difficult points that we will be facing in the next future with Russia, because to what extent after this war, someday that will be over, yeah, to which society we will be to confront, I mean, from the Western. I'm not talking already within the Russian society, that's going to be also very tough for political opposition or leaders that would try to create a new regime. But I see it very, very difficult, because today, even people who were in the past very for the war, yeah, to defend the country and so, they stick very close to the military today. I have friends who died on the battlefield, for instance, yeah. I discussed with them, we criticized Putin and so, and then suddenly they call me, hey, Fran, I am on the battlefield today, will you be next, my friend? So, and, you know, people who actually weren't especially pro-Putin, yeah, pro-regime.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we have a time for one short question. Nobody? I think there was so much to think. I have to keep on thinking a little bit, but I will be in touch with you, because I think we have very similar interest in Russia. So thank you, everybody, and once again, I'm so sorry we had a not little but a huge technical problem during this panel, but I hope you got many of new thoughts and what to think when we think of future Russia. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I can already disconnect, yeah? Okay, mega thank you.
and the theme of this session is Geopolitics and Strategy. In this session we have two excellent speakers and presentations, each having 20 minutes and 10 minutes for questions. And the first presenter is retired Captain Navy Stepan Jakimiak. Stepan Jakimiak has a PhD on military sciences from the National Defence University of Ukraine. He has served in the Ukrainian armed forces over 3 decades, his last position being the Chief of Naval Forces Department, National Defence University of Ukraine, from which he retired in 2024. He is the author of more than 2,000 scientific works. His scientific research areas are national and international maritime security and strategy, naval strategy, hybrid war at sea, joint maritime operations. And sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Excellent. Welcome, and I'll be switching the slides for you, so say just when you want me to change the slide, and I'll change the slides. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. I would like to thank the organizers of the seminar for the opportunity to speak. If my online presentation is interrupted due to a lack of electricity and internet, I would like to ask the organizers of the seminar to show the slides of my presentations to the participants of the event. The topic of my speech is the Third Muscovite Empire, future threats to Europe and international maritime security. An analysis of Russia's war against Ukraine shows that in the event of Ukraine's retreat, there is a threat of Muscovy attacking European states, and there are historical reasons for this, because such is the nature of the Muscovite Empire. Please, next slide. On the next slide, you will see a brief summary of my own experience of participating in the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. The presentation will address please, previous slide. Please, previous slide. Thanks. The presentation will address 3 questions. First of all, we will conduct a brief comparative analysis of the development of the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation, and define main elements of the geostrategy of the modern Muscovite Empire. After that, we will synthesize the entire spectrum of threats to Europe from its own experience and the experience of Russia's war against Ukraine. And finally, we will forecast future actions of Russian Federation in Europe and in maritime theaters and formulate conclusions and recommendations. Please, next slide. The relevance of research is due to the following problem. On the one hand, we have such deteriorating security conditions for Europe, growing negative consequences for Europe as a result of Russia's war against Ukraine. First, weakening security ties with the US as it prioritizes its efforts in the Western Hemisphere and the Indo-Pacific. Growing hybrid influence in potential threats of Russian aggression against European states. And the other hand, we need to ensure stability and sustainable development of European countries in the face of deepening global competition, which requires the development of security capabilities and increased spending on them. Therefore, the main purpose of the research is to determine the types and scope of military threats to Europe from Russian Federation, the parameters of this possible expansion on land and at sea, and to develop recommendations for responding on them, taking into account the experience of the Russians' war against Ukraine. Next slide, please. And the first questions of our research was, is there a pattern in the formation and collapse of Muscovite empires? The question is not even rhetorical. There is a clear logic to collapse of this formation based on historical statistics. As you can see on the slide, the duration of the cycle of the empire's existence is reduced from 200 years to 70 and maybe to 35 years, LV predict and expect it. Next slide, please. A very important observation. In its history, each Muscovite empire wanted to capture those territories that were captured in the previous historical period. Based on this, we can clearly predict the next attempts of the Third Muscovite Empire to occupy the part of territories of 7 European countries, except Ukraine, and the depth of offensive will be up to 300 to 500 kilometers. Next slide, please. And yes, there are geographical factors, yes, strategic aspects, yes, and historically conditioned subjective factors, the desire of the empire's leadership. Every subsequent emperor wants to remain in history as the greatest conqueror. It is important to understand the main cornerstones of Muscovite's imperialism. Firstly, is a special exceptionalism and Russia's special mission for the world. Secondly, usually a cruel physical military expansion. This is not economic or cultural expansion. And next, use of linguistic and religious aspects, Russian world, to justify aggression, cruel treatment of captured peoples, and usually use of not one's own but foreign standards and intellectual resources for development and management in the empire system. Next slide, please. What are the results of the activity, for example, of the Third Muscovite Empire? It has already started more than 10 wars, and this is not only on the borders of the empire, but also in more remote areas, ex-Yugoslavia, Syria, etc. An analysis of the works of modern Russian geopoliticians Alexander Dugin, Kamaluddin Gadzhiev, Leonid Kvashnin, and others confirms the direction of Russia's geostrategy. Next slide. The modern geostrategy of the Muscovite Empire is not new, and it provides for to ensure the development of Muscovy by using its own exceptional status as the largest owner of land space and nuclear weapons in the world, expanding its influence on states and strategic regions, including the use of military force. To achieve this goal, the empire carries out restoration and expansion of ex-USSR nuclear potential, restoration of control over historical territories of empire, including Europe, formation Russian-led Eurasian and global alliances and expansion of zones, weakening of key global actors where alliances, in particular NATO, European Union, etc. Next slide. What is the danger of such a geostrategy of Europe? This geostrategy and analysis of Russia's wars shows that the following threats are already being deployed against Europe and will be scaled up each time. Significant expansion of sabotage and hybrid actors, scale up of information and psychological influence on the population of European countries, in particular regarding the spread of narratives of weakness of European Union and NATO, strengthening military intelligence activities in Europe, and building up task forces on Europe's borders, preparing Russian forces for potential limited and full-scale military operations to restore control over the historical territories of Russia in Europe. Next slide, please. In addition, there will be intensive actions by Moscow in the seas around Europe. Some of the threats are already being implemented. In the future, they will grow to more significant scale, in particular, destabilization of functioning of maritime elements of communications networks, navigation system, port activities, our critical maritime coastal infrastructure, disruption, blockade of shipping in critical nodes, demonstrating or carry out selective, overt or covert destruction of critical facilities in European waters using unmanned aerial and naval vehicles, long-range missile weapons, and other modern means, and advanced deployment and potential rapid conduct of limited actions at sea, from the sea, and from the air, raids to establish control over specific areas and expand Russia's access to the sea coast, Kaliningrad Oblast, Gulf of Finland, etc. Preparation of forces for conducting integrated joint maritime or air-land-sea operations to seize the historical Russian territories of European states and maritime spaces. Next slide, please. I want to emphasize the importance of Ukrainian experience for Europe's counteraction to Russian threats. In 2025, Ukraine expanded the scope of influence on Moscow in several seas, as is shown in the slide. The Ukrainian defense forces struck and damaged some Russian ships and vessels in the Mediterranean, Baltic, Caspian Seas, and in inland waters on Lake Onega. This option should also be used by Europe, naval forces, and other forces. Other efforts under Operation Baltic Sentry, which began in Baltic Sea in 2025, sufficient and comprehensive? Are NATO forces in the Baltic Sea ready, and how will they act in the event that Russia closes areas to navigation and seizes radars posts on the islands? Are the robotic naval strike units of the Baltic Sea countries scaled up, and are these forces ready for strikes by unmanned aerial vehicles operating from unmanned maritime drones? Next slide, please. For that, some recommendation for countering these threats: advanced preparation for forces and critical plan for capture by the enemy areas, borders, and facilities for comprehensive defenses. Conducting events and action to demonstrate defense readiness and decision cessation of any hybrid, illegal, and dangerous action by Russian Federation into short term with broad coverage of the events and an appeal to international organizations and partners. Early and pragmatic formation of new military and security partnership and alliances designed to jointly repel Russian aggression, as well as the creation and training of joint military formation. It's also important to monitor future action in the War Sea. If you are interested, a few words about the predictions of war in Black Sea in 2026. Moscow will try to scale up naval drones and stop sea exports from Ukraine. It will continue to destroy maritime infrastructure. Ukraine will use robotic naval forces to destroy the enemy's military economic potential at sea and will complete the destruction of Russia's main strike surface and underwater forces in Novorossiysk. In conclusions, I would like to draw the attention of our European colleagues to the following forecast. The report of the Munich Security Conference, based on the publication of The Economist, concludes that Russia may launch aggression against European countries 6 months after the end of the ongoing war in Ukraine. I would like to clarify this forecast a bit. In the worst case scenario for Ukraine, Russia will be ready to immediately carry out aggression against one or several European states. Why, you ask? Because Russia will not need to restore or build up its forces. The entire Russian army from Ukraine can immediately be used to attack Europe. Ammunition and everything else will also be ready. All that remains is to properly logistically send them by train to European borders, but I have an even more devastating prediction for you. Russia may, without ending the war in Ukraine, simultaneously begin its aggression against several European states. Again, Russia has such a resource. Russia is only waiting for the right moment. That is favorable conditions for such open aggression. And time is working against Ukraine. Europe against Europe. Ukraine experience has already confirmed this. Glory to Ukraine and glory to Europe. Dear colleagues, thank you for your attention. Any questions? And dear colleagues, I apologize for my not very high level of English. I will not be able to fully and qualitatively answer your questions. If there is some here who can help and translate from Ukraine, I am ready to answer your questions. If not, please send me your questions by my email, and I will definitely answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And thank you for very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. So now we have a good 10 minutes for questions, and please raise your hand if you have a question. Anyone? Okay, I let the audience to warm up a little bit. So, sir, I have a question for you, and it is a question as you have a extensive naval background. What do you think, or how do you see this new Russian naval development program that was announced last year for 2050? How will it affect Russia's aims and strategy going forward? Does it somehow affect the scenarios that you just provided us? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I will try to answer your question. Last year and some last years, Russia started some plan to create unmanned fleets. We know in Leningrad and St. Petersburg now and other regions in Russia was created some elements for this. The center of competency of unmanned robotic systems, and you know Russians created some examples of unmanned vessels, unmanned vehicles. And last year, I know two examples of employment of these forces. First of this example was in Danube River, but Ukrainian naval forces commander did not speak about this example, and officially we did not know about this example. But second example was small attack of unmanned surface vehicles of Russian forces near Odessa, and this attack was finished by defense forces of Ukraine. This attack is not was not successful. What conclusions we will do from this experience of employment of Russian forces, Russians unmanned forces in Black Sea? I think today Russia not ready to provide and employment, effective employment, successful employment of task groups of unmanned surface and under-surface vehicles. Why? I think Russians has some problems to create these forces. They are ready to do many good jobs, good weapons and others, but today technological level of this scientific research and production is not adaptive right to modern war at sea. And I want to say some another idea. For many countries, for many navies in the world, today we has a modern and future threat at sea, unmanned system, unmanned technologies, unmanned forces, unmanned squadrons, unmanned naval forces. And first of all, big ships, big combat ships is not ready to defend from these modern unmanned systems. And I think in the future we will see at sea only unmanned forces. these forces will be effectiveness to destroy other forces, and big combat ships too. This is my opinion, and I think it will be tomorrow in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your answer to the question. And at this point, is there any additional questions from the audience? One. Okay, we have 4 minutes. So.
Marcin Górnikiewicz from Defense Futures and Force Design. A very quick question, because you mentioned that when Russia will end this war in Ukraine, in your country, in the same time they will start another war. Which countries, in your opinion, right now could be a possible targets? Thank you.
I think, first of all, it will be Litva by Kaliningrad Oblast, and corridor is very important for Russians. And next, maybe Estonia, Esti, Narva city, Narva town, and Finland, sea between Estonia and Finland. This is a very important point to Russian naval forces and war sea from Russia against Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for answering our questions, and thank you for your presentation. And let's give a hand.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Next presentation will be given without streaming, so thank you for the audience over there in the internet. We will cut the streaming now and move to the next presentation. And our next presenter will be Colonel Pavlo Slizar, Professor PhD of the National Security and Defense Strategy Department of the National Defence University of Ukraine.